or what happens after graduation, I should say, and the focus there should be the work visa that you get, hopefully. We're going to talk very briefly at the end about permanent residence. There's a lot in the slide deck about permanent residence, and you'll get that from Dale Watanabe a little bit later. But we're going to talk very briefly about permanent residence because there's really not time to cover both topics in one presentation. That would take all afternoon. So let's get started to talk about what you should do after graduation. This presentation is general information about immigration. It's not specific information on your, I don't know what happened to my share there. Okay, it's not particular specific information about your situation. If you need that, you can arrange a consultation with me, or you can just send me an email. And by the way, if you send me a very simple email asking a very simple question, I can answer it easily in return. But if you ask me a difficult question, I'm going to ask you to set up a consultation. A typical difficult question would be, how do I get a green card? That's not an easy question. Or I'm planning an investment in the United States. Will that help me stay here? That's not an easy question. But if you hit me with a really easy question, when is the H-1B registration open? Those kinds of things I can easily answer. All right, now if I can just bring up the screen again, it minimized here. Okay. Very important that you get your advice, your legal advice, from reliable sources, not from your friends and relatives. That's the worst place you can get advice. Friends and relatives usually have vague ideas of what immigration laws might be. Many people have the idea that immigration laws should make sense. They make absolutely no sense. So if someone's giving you advice based on what would make sense, in the normal situation, that's usually wrong. Also, friends and relatives have had experiences in the past, and immigration laws change radically all the time. I think I stopped the share, didn't I? Okay, hold on. All right. So very important that you only get your advice from reliable sources. And that would be basically a qualified immigration attorney, that is an immigration attorney that knows about the situation that you're asking about. Keep in mind that immigration attorneys specialize, they focus heavily. And if you're asking about asylum, for example, you want to talk to an immigration attorney that knows about asylum. If you're asking about a family case, say you're married to a U.S. citizen, you want to talk to an immigration attorney that knows about those areas. Also, really important that anything relating to your student status or benefits that derive from your student status, like CPT and OPT, you talk to your international office first. They have the very best information about student issues. Don't reach out to me first and ask a question about your OPT. I'm just going to shoot you right back to the international office. Unless it's a complicated issue, and of course, unless they've referred you to me. Many times they do that. They'll tell you to consult me or consult another attorney. Another really good source of information is your career services office. We're going to talk in more detail about career services in just a second, but they're a really good source of information. They know a lot about immigration. Okay, and I am having problems with the share here. I can't get it to maximize. Let's see if I can go here. So these are your 5 steps if you want to stay in the United States. And I'm having a real problem with the screen share here. I'm sorry, folks. It is very, very tiny. I need to know how to get it to maximize. Okay.
It looks fine on my end.
Yeah, it looks great on your end, but it's about the size of a postage stamp on my end, and I can't read it.
Oh, God. Okay.
Yeah, that's the problem I'm having. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to escape from Ring Central, and I'm going to, let's see here. If I can get to this other screen. Okay. Sorry guys for this. I'm usually very good at this because I do it all the time, but it's not cooperating today. Let's see what we got here. No, that's not what we want. Okay. All right. Let's see. I want presentation. Yeah. Okay. All right. This is strange. Okay. So let's just see if I can read this in the five tiny. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. Hold on just a second. I get my other computer. Hold on just a sec. Should be just a second. I'll have my other computer up here. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So getting back to those 5 steps, if you want to stay in the US, really easy. The first thing you need to do is complete a degree in a field in demand in the United States. How do you figure out what fields are in demand in the US? Well, here's my shout out to Career Services. You need to go to Career Services early and often. I'm willing to bet that many of you in this audience have never been to Career Services, and you're in a major in like sociology, for example, which when you finish sociology, you have an undergrad degree in sociology, you will not be able to get a job in the US. And I don't mean to burst anybody's bubble. Sociology is a great field, but it does not lead to employment directly in the US. You might have to get a graduate degree in some other field. That's just one example. I see a lot of unfortunate cases where people have really worked hard and studied hard in their major. They're in their junior year, but they've chosen a major that's really not appropriate if they want to stay in the United States. There's certain fields that are really in high demand in the US. Most of those, unfortunately, for those of you who are right-brained, most of those are STEM fields, technical fields like computer science and things like that. But sometimes you have to defer your dream if you want to stay in the US, if that's your main goal, and you might have to enroll in technical major in order to achieve that dream. So very important that you go to Career Services early and often, because those folks know exactly what fields are in demand in the US. They can give you reading to do to try to determine what you're most suited to. They can also coach you in perfecting your CV and helping you with interview skills so that you are more easily able to get a job. Don't miss out. Step 2, don't miss out on OPT. This is really important. OPT is your bridge into the work world from your studies, from the academic world. If you miss OPT, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to stay and get a job in the US, because it does form that vital bridge. If you have the STEM OPT option available to you, take advantage of that. Sometimes, depending on your nationality, depending on where you were born, sometimes it's possible to complete the entire permanent residence process within the 3 years of STEM OPT. Note, and the international office can give you more information about this, A number of new majors have been added to the STEM area. And so it's really important, and that whether or not you're considered to be STEM and eligible for STEM OPT is determined by what we call your SIP code on your I-20. If your SIP code is a STEM SIP code, then you could be eligible for STEM OPT. If it's not a STEM SIP code, then you're not eligible for sure. But they have added a number of new SIP codes to the STEM list. So you need to check with the international office to see if your major has been added to that list. It's possible. Now, the third step is really, really important also. You're on OPT, you have permission to work in the U.S. for most employers and, in most occupations, as long as it relates to your last major. So you need to be sure that the company that you're going with is a solid company. You also need to be sure that that company is going to sponsor you for first a work visa and then for a green card. When you're in the interview with the company, you need to ask about their sponsorship processes or their sponsorship policies. Some companies make you wait a very, very long time before they'll sponsor you for a green card. Some companies don't sponsor for work visas or green cards. So what you need to do in the interview is gently ask about their sponsorship policies. Don't appear to be pushy or demanding, but gently ask about those sponsorship policies, because if you don't get sponsored, if you can't get sponsored for a work visa or a green card, and you really want to stay in the U.S., what's the point in going with that company rather than another company? Step 4 is get your work visa. That's usually going to be an H-1B for 90% of you. There are a few alternative work visas I'm going to mention in just a second, but the H-1B is going to be for most of you. And we'll talk about in great detail what the H-1B involves, every aspect of the H-1B. Very, very important to remind your employer to make sure that your employer includes you in the H-1B registration and petitioning process. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute, what the registration process is and what the petitioning process is. But very, very important that it includes you each year, because there is a lottery for H-1B visas. And that lottery is critical. If you get selected in the lottery, you get a visa. If you don't get selected in the lottery, you don't get one. For those of you who have only 1 year of OPT available to you, it's critical, of course, that you get into the lottery registration process during that only year of OPT you have. If you have STEM available to you, you must get into the lottery every year because, for many of you who don't have a graduate degree in the U.S. earned in the U.S., your chances of being selected in the lottery are 50% or less. If you have a graduate degree, maybe 60 to 70% chance. So really, really important you get into that lottery every year. Then once you're on the work visa, you basically convince the company that you're indispensable, and they will usually agree to sponsor your green card. I've seen companies, on the other hand, refuse to sponsor mediocre employees. If you're not a stellar employee, they won't sponsor you, because typically for the company, sponsoring you both for the H-1B and for the green card involves a significant investment, monetary investment. They have to pay for the entire H-1B process, and they have to pay for part of the green card process. Okay.
You are muted, David. Yeah.
I'm muted. What happened here? My screen. Okay. Yeah. Dale, can you see if you can advance this slide? Because I made you moderator. See what happens if you try to advance the slide. Let's see.
Sorry, I don't have access to advance the slide.
Okay.
I did get your PowerPoint, so I can try to bring it up.
This is never had this much technical difficulty with this. Okay, let me. It's frozen. All right. Let me go back and share screen again. There we go. Okay. All right. All right, I'm going to just share it. Folks, I'm going to share this in edit mode just to see if I can manipulate it better. There you go. No, it's still not letting me advance the slides. Oh. Okay, I'm going to try again. Okay, at least I got it to advance one. Okay, good, it's advancing now. All right. All right, so the work visa you want typically is the H-1B. This is the principal immigration status that you're gonna be able to achieve after graduation. This is for folks working temporarily in professional level jobs. By professional level, I mean jobs that require a degree in a specific area, specific academic area. I've got up here a link to a little group called MEHelp.com. There's a link that shows you who sponsors for H-1Bs. This is one of several private entities that share public Department of Labor data on who files H-1Bs every year. So this link will show you who sponsors, not only who sponsors, but what jobs they sponsor for, what geographic locations they're in, how much they're paying for those jobs, what types of jobs they are, lots of different things. So very, very useful. So I would be, you definitely need to look at this site or look at a site similar to it prior to going into your interview to know if your company, the company you're going to interview with, sponsors for H-1B, how many they sponsor, what types of positions they sponsor for, and so on. So recently, immigration has gotten a little bit tougher on the definition of H-1B. In the past, they would allow sponsorship for positions where a variety of different fields were allowed for the position. For example, if you're going into a position where you're working on statistical issues for credit card companies, in the past, they might allow a degree in mathematics, statistics, a lot of different fields, technical fields, but they've kind of narrowed that. So you have to be careful. The position has to require the specific degree field that you hold. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So I have a little diagram here, which basically shows you the three requirements for the H-1B, what I call the three-legged stool. If any of these requirements is missing, you do not get the H-1B. So first of all, you possess a degree, at least one four-year degree, a bachelor's degree. It is possible sometimes to equate experience in lieu of years of study. For example, if you have a 3-year degree, and this is very common from India, if you have a 3-year degree plus 3 years of professional level experience, immigration may agree to equate that to a degree, a 4-year degree for H-1B purposes. But that's a little bit outside the norm. Normally, it requires a 4-year degree. The second point is that the job requires the same or similar degree field. So you have the degree, the job requires the same or similar degree. And the third element is the employer is willing to pay you what we call the required wage, which is basically a competitive wage for the area where you're going to be working and the occupation in which you're going to be working. And they're willing to pay all the filing fees and all the attorney's fees for the H-1B. Those filing fees and attorney's fees generally total for most employers, generally total a little over $5,000. So if your employer is not willing to invest that amount of money in you, then you're not going to get the H-1B, because you cannot pay for the H-1B yourself. That's illegal. So if any of these three elements is missing, you have the degree, but the position doesn't require your degree field, or the employer is completely unwilling to pay for anything. They just say you pay for it yourself. Then you're not going to get the H-1B. Okay. So there are a lot of other H-1B requirements that are pretty esoteric, pretty obscure, but attorneys know about them, but not many employers know about them. So first of all, just to let you know, you can have more than one H-1B at a time. This is also pretty uncommon, but it does happen. You can have definitely more than H-1B at a time. H-1Bs can be part-time. They do not have to be full-time. You're generally limited to 6 years of H-1B status with all employers, unless your employer begins the permanent residence process prior to the end of your 5th year. So it's really, really important that you get started on the permanent residence process with your employer. You start discussing it no later, I'd say, than the end of your 4th year of H-1B. You definitely need to get going, because Labor Department processing times are very long. And if you don't have something filed with the government to start your permanent residence process before the end of your 5th year of H-1B, then you could easily run out of H-1B time before you're able to extend it. If you file something with the government, the first step of the green card process with the government prior to the end of your 5th year of H-1B, then you're guaranteed that your employer can keep getting more years of H-1B for you until you get the green card. It's sort of like what I'd call a safe harbor. Your employment has to be directly related to a degree program that you have finished, a degree that you finished. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to your last degree program. So for example, let's say you're doing an MBA now and you're focusing on management. You get a job offer, but your undergrad degree was in engineering. You get a job offer as an engineering project manager. Then that relates actually to both degree programs, but primarily to your engineering program. And that's fine. That's okay. Not a problem. Very important that you know that H-1B workers are allowed to have what we call dual intent. Dual intent is the short-term intent to be a temporary worker and the long-term intent to be a permanent resident. So I just had a client who's at a consulate in Europe about to get his H-1B visa saying, wait a minute, hold up on my green card process. I want to get my H-1B visa first. And I said, look, you're very confused. The H-1B is a dual intent visa. It doesn't matter that you're in the permanent residence process. The consul will not care. He or she will still give you that visa because you're allowed to have dual intent. Short-term intent to be a temporary worker, long-term intent to be a permanent resident. It is possible sometimes that immigration can give you a 60-day grace period between jobs. This was put in the law a couple of years ago by President Obama. However, keep in mind that if you just voluntarily quit job number 1 and 60 days, 59 days later, job number 2 files for you, they may not give you that grace period. The grace period was intended to be for people who suddenly lose their job without warning and need the grace period in order to find a new job. So if you quit voluntarily and lay around watching TV for 45 days and then the new employer files for you, that may not work. So because there is a limited number of H-1B visas, we already mentioned this briefly before, there is a lottery every year because many more employers petition for the H-1B than there are visas available. So we're going to talk in great detail about the registration process in just a second, how to get into the lottery and how to perfect your case in the lottery if you're chosen. Okay. There are a few other obligations of the employer that in the H-1B filing process, petitioning process, they can't engage in fraud in the process. In other words, if they say they're going to pay you $50,000 and they're going to employ you in San Antonio, Texas, They can't pay you $40,000 and employ you in Houston, Texas. That would be fraud. Fraud is when you lie or misrepresent yourself to the government. And unfortunately, if your employer lies or misrepresents himself or herself to the government, you're going to be blamed for that, or you're going to get some of the blame. So you have to be very, very careful that the employer is being truthful in what they're filing with the government. There has to be a rational relationship between the size and nature of the employer and what the petition says you're going to be doing for them, okay? Immigration is very aware that very, very small companies do not necessarily need very highly specialized professionals. For example, if a convenience store is petitioning for you as an accountant, that wouldn't make sense if it were an individual convenience store that maybe had 4 or 5 employees. However, if it were a chain of convenience stores, let's say 10 or 12 or 20, and they petition for you as an accountant, that would make a lot of sense because the size and the nature of the business would make sense that they would need an accountant. Whereas if it were one convenience store, it would not make any sense. We mentioned earlier that they have to agree, the employer has to agree to employ you only in the geographic areas, that is the cities set out in the H-1b petition packet. So as I said before, if they say they're gonna employ you in San Antonio, but they actually employ you in Houston, that's not permitted unless they've listed both Houston and San Antonio in the petition itself. Next up, they have to agree to pay you the required wage. And we're going to walk through what the required wage is in just a second. Okay. So the required wage is the higher of what we call the actual or prevailing wage. The actual wage is an average of wages paid to similarly employed people at the same work site as your work site. The prevailing wage is a weighted mean or median wage for the geographic area where you're going to be employed. So let's say the area of San Antonio, Texas, the geographic area of San Antonio, Texas. You would measure wages within that geographic area to come up with a prevailing wage. The actual wage would be the wage paid at your actual work site where you're actually working. So they have to pay the higher of these two. And basically, without doing a lot of complicated math, basically it comes down to they have to pay you a competitive wage for your skill level, for the geographic area where you're going to be working, and for the job that you're going to be doing for them, okay? And if you want to figure out before you go into the interview what would be that competitive wage for where you would be working for that company, there is a database for that, the flcdatacenter.com. And I'm going to show you what that flcdatacenter.com looks like. Okay, so here are the wages for San Francisco. I think, or is it Houston? I can't remember. Anyway, here are the wages for computer programmers or computer systems analysts for this area. I think it's San Francisco. And the level 1 wage is what you should be looking at, the highlighted one there. You should be paid, the employer should be offering you at minimum the level 1 wage for whatever geographic area you're going to be working in. And this flcdatacenter.com is a really easy website to use. You go in it, you choose whether you want a private employer or whether you want a higher education employer. Then you go on to the county and state where you're going to be working, and then you choose the occupation, you click on it, and up come the wages. So it's really easy. I would check it out before you go to your interview. Okay. More employer obligations, a few more. They have to pay your return transportation, or at least offer to pay your return transportation to your home country if you're terminated within the term of the H-1b petition that's approved for you. In other words, if your petition is approved for 3 years and you're separated from employment involuntarily during that 3-year period, they have to offer to pay that return transportation. Not many people take that offer. Most people accept another job or find another job quickly somewhere else, but occasionally you will want to accept that. They have to notify other workers of the terms of the job via 2 10-day postings at the workplace. And as I said before, they have to pay all the attorney's fees involved in preparing the petition and filing it, and they have to pay all the filing fees that are involved. Okay, so very, very important that they agree to pay that. All right, so what are those fees? Well, the regular, what they call the regular filing fee is $460. That's for the petition itself. Then there's something called the anti-fraud fee. That's $500. Then there's another fee called the Acquia fee for employers with 26 or more full-time employees. That's $1,500. For employers with 25 or fewer full-time employees, that's $750. There's a filing fee for dependents, $370. There's a premium fee, $2,500, which gets you 15-day processing. And attorney's fees, what are those? Well, they vary a whole lot. You can find self-help H-1b preparation programs on the internet. I think they charge $299, and they promise that some attorney will look at your paperwork before it's filed. I definitely would not go there. You can also find firms on the internet that will charge up to $10,000 for an H-1b. I probably wouldn't go there. So if for any reason you're given the task of finding an attorney to prepare the H-1b petition, ask about their fees, shop around a lot. I would definitely land on an attorney that charged somewhere in the middle between $299 or $10 and $10,000, somewhere in the sweet spot there in the middle somewhere. So you don't want to go with the super cheap people, and you don't want to go with the real expensive people either. Okay. So as I said, the employer has to pay for both attorney's fees and filing fees. If they won't agree to do that, then this conversation ends right there. If they don't agree to do both those things, then you can't get an H-1b through that employer. Okay, so it's just that simple. If they don't agree to pay those fees and they force those on you, they can get in huge trouble. You can't really get in trouble. It's not a violation of your immigration status to pay the fees, but it is a big violation for them. If the Labor Department finds out that they're doing that, they will come in and go after them like you wouldn't believe, and that could jeopardize your employment with them. And you also need to know that if the employer is cutting corners and doing shady things like that legally, they could be doing other legally shady things and possibly get you involved. For example, if you're an accountant for a business and they're doing strange things with their accounting books, that could put you in peril. That could, cause you to go to jail possibly. And note that the employer is not responsible for your dependent fees or responsible for the premium processing fee if you want premium processing for purely personal reasons. If your employer is refusing to pay the attorney's fees or the filing fees, have them talk to a good immigration attorney, and the immigration attorney can explain to them why this is important. There have been employers that have forced these fees onto their employees. One in Maryland was fined over $3 million. Another employer in Tennessee was fined over $1 million for forcing these fees onto employees. Okay, let's move along here. Let's talk a little bit now about how the lottery works. Okay, so the first thing that happens in the visa lottery, the H-1b lottery, is the employer registers your name. And well, first of all, the employer registers itself. Most employers who do H-1bs regularly are registers itself, and sets up a username and a password for its own registration site. Then it registers the names and personal information of all those employees that it wants to put into the lottery. And someone is unmuted. Can you mute yourself? We hear your, whoever that is. I can't tell who it is. So you go into this registration period. This year, the registration is going to be March 1st through, what have I got up there? I can't read it myself. I think it's March 1st through 21st. Is that right?
March 18th.
18th. Good. Thank you for that. It's so tiny. It's really tiny. I can't read it. So this year, there's about 3 weeks during which the employer can register you if they want to, or if you're not there, if you're not at graduation yet, when you get there, that's the way it'll work. They put your name in the hat. Then about a week or two after registration stops, immigration will announce the folks that have been chosen in the lottery, and they'll notify the employer. And then if that's the case, usually immigration gives about 30 days, a 30-day period or 60-day period to file the H-1B packet, the entire packet. And the employer has to file that entire packet within that period designated by immigration, or you're no longer selected, your selection goes away. So there are two steps. Well, actually there are three steps. The employer registers itself, the employer puts your name in the hat for the registers your name and your personal information, and then within the timeline set by immigration, they file their entire H-1B packet for you. Okay. Now, note that sometimes in the last 2 years, immigration has conducted more than one lottery. This past year, they conducted actually 3 selections. The last selection was in November. So that's amazing. Normally, there's just one lottery, but the year before, there were 2. This past year, there were 3. So just keep that in mind. If you lose, if you don't win the first time around, it's possible to win a few weeks later. Okay, now, what's filed where and when for the H-1B packet? Someone is unmuted. Please mute yourself. Don't know who that is. Okay, so what's filed where and when? If you're selected in the lottery, you have to complete the petitioning process by filing a full petition. First is something called the labor condition application. This is filed electronically with the U.S. Department of Labor, and this generally takes about 7 days to be approved. It can take longer if the employer has never filed an H-1B or rarely files H-1Bs, because the Labor Department may want to verify the employer's information before they file. Next up is the H-1B petition, and this is filed together with the approved LCA, evidence of your qualifications, some information about the employer and the job, and it's filed at a remote USCIS service center. There are 2 service centers that handle H-1Bs, one in California and one in Vermont. Depending on where you're working in the United States and the nature of your H-1B, your case will be filed with one of those service centers. If you're maintaining lawful status in the U.S., you can change status in the U.S. along with your spouse and minor unmarried children. You can all change to H-1B, or in the case of your dependents, H-4 status. If you've ever been an exchange visitor in the past, this could cause you problems in changing status in the United States. It's very, very, very important that you've ever been an an exchange visitor in the past. You bring this up with the attorney handling the H-1B immediately, and they take a look at that right away to make sure it's not going to cause you a problem. And someone, again, is unmuted. Could you please mute yourself? Thank you. Someone is unmuted. There you go. And by the way, I'm only seeing one message in the chat box. Just a reminder, if you want to ask questions, put those questions in the chat, and we'll answer those in the order they're placed in the chat at the end of the presentation. I'm only seeing one message, which is, just not really a message, just a yes. So please put your questions in the chat box. Okay. If you're outside the United States when the H-1B is filed, or you're going to be traveling right after filing, you're not going to change status. You're going to pick up your visa at a U.S. consulate abroad. And the only exception to coming back into the U.S. with a new H-1B visa after you travel is short trips to Mexico or Canada. This is called automatic extension of visa validity. If you go to Mexico or Canada for less than 30 days, you can come back in without a visa. And of course, if we have Canadians on the call, which we probably do, because you're so close to the border, Canadians do not need a visa stamp in their passport to come back in. All they need is the approval notice of the H-1B. And sometimes they may need an updated employment letter. Okay, good. People are placing questions in the chat. That's great. Thank you so much. There's a slide here. It's stuck for some reason. Well, this is the worst experience I've had with we've done this every year for an umpteen years, and I've never had this much problem with audio visual ever. Okay. Well, I'm just going to have to, looks like I'm stuck. Will not advance. Let me see if I can backspace. Nope, it's frozen there too. All right, I'm just going to have to talk, and you're just going to have to tolerate hearing me talk for quite a while. We're almost done with the H1b section. So finally, you get your H1b approval. Processing of the H1b generally takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months without premium processing, or 15 days with premium processing. And once you're approved and in H1b status, that is, remember I said earlier, H1b status does not take effect until October 1st of the year, after the lottery and after the petitioning process. October 1st, your H1b will take effect. Once your H1b takes effect, then you can move to a new employer after that, if you wish, based on a filing by the new employer of a new petition, H1b petition. You don't go through the lottery again as long as you change employers after October 1st. If you try to change employers before October 1st, you'll be put back in the lottery. You will lose your place in the lottery. I'm sorry, you'll not be put back in the lottery, but you'll lose your place in the lottery, and you'll really mess up your situation, totally mess up your situation. Students try to do this every year. They want to change employers before October 1st, and they try to do that, but it's a recipe for disaster. You'll absolutely positively lose your place in the lottery. You'll go back to square one. You won't have any OPT left, and you'll be in a real bad situation. So don't try to do that. But if you change after October 1, after at least one pay period after October 1, and you have your pay stub from your employer A, you want to change to employer B, you can do what we call porting, which means that employer B can simply file a petition for you, and based on that filing, you can move over to employer B. Okay. Let's talk a minute about the quota. Let me see again. This is not letting me. Let's stop share and see if I can get it to move by sharing again. Okay, let's see what happens here. All right. There you go. All right, let's see. Okay, good. It's moving. Yay. All right, so regarding the quota, quota means in English, it's a good old, I'm not sure if it's Latin or Greek. I think it might be Latin. It means a limited number, okay? And so we have a limited number of H1Bs made available each year. Currently, there are about 78,200 H1Bs per fiscal year, and that's new H1Bs. That doesn't mean people who are renewing or extending their H1B status. That's new H1Bs, which come under the quota. 58,200 for those with no U.S. earned master's degree, and another 20,000 for those with a U.S. earned master's degree or higher degree, PhD, or professional degree. The reason why this is an odd number, 78,200, is because we did free trade agreements with Chile and Singapore quite a few years ago. And when we did that, Congress set aside 6,800 visas, work visas for those Chileans and Singaporeans. And those are pretty much used up every year. Those are called H1b ones. And so that subtracts from the original total, which was 85,000. Okay, so quota statistics. So you can look back to 2012. That was the last year that we had no lottery, that not enough visa petitions were filed initially to satisfy the quota. And then since then, we've had a lottery every year since 2013. Last year, about 275,000 visa petitions were filed. And remember, I said 78,200 visas are available. Okay, so 275,000 filed. That's not good. That doesn't yield a great statistical average for what your chances of getting into the lottery will be. Really, really important. I just want to remind you guys of this. It's not going to kill the employer. It's not going to kill their business if you don't get selected in the lottery, because you're one employee of maybe a dozen or hundreds. But it will kind of ruin your future if you don't get selected in the lottery. So it's really, really important that you stay on top of the employer, make sure that they're filing the paperwork they should, make sure they put you in the registration process, make sure they follow up if you're selected in the lottery by filing their entire petition. Really important that you stay on the employer or their attorney. Okay. So there are some folks who are exempt from the quota. One very important one for you to remember is people who are counted against the quota, who have been counted against the quota in the past 6 years. So if you were ever an H-1B in the past, it's really important to let an employer know that, because that means, generally it means, it's going to mean that you have been counted against the quota. The most typical example would be you come in, you work for Infosys for a couple of years, and you say, hey, it would really advance my career if I got an MBA at Seattle University. So you change back to student status, you get your H-1B, you get your MBA, go on to OPT, but then you can easily change back to H-1B, no problem, because you've been counted against the quota within the past 6 years. Okay, so it's really important that you know about that exemption. Folks who work in higher education are not subject to the quota. And also folks who work in nonprofits with a written affiliation agreement with higher education are not subject to the quota. Folks who work in nonprofit research organizations and government research organizations are not subject to the quota. And note that most nonprofits and most government entities are subject to the quota. For example, City of Seattle, if they want to hire you as city engineer, they are subject to the quota. They are a government entity, but they're not a government research entity. Same thing with United Way or Goodwill. Goodwill down on Dearborn and what's the street, cross street there, the big Goodwill headquarters. Say Goodwill wants to hire you as an IT specialist. They're a nonprofit, but they're not a nonprofit research organization. They're not so they are subject to the quota. There are a couple of other really arcane, obscure exemptions from the quota that you need to know about, but probably will not come up in your life, but could. Those who work at rather than for a quota exempt employer. In other words, if you work, Seattle University, of course, is exempt from the quota because they're a university. If you get hired by an entity that works on the premises of Seattle University, they may be exempt from the quota also. For example, if they have an outside entity running their dining hall and you're offered a job as dining hall manager or some management position within the dining services, that could be exempt from the quota, because even though you're working for a private employer, you're working on the premises of Seattle University. Finally, the last quota exemption is folks who hold concurrent H-1Bs with a quota exempt employer and a quota subject employer. The example I like to use is Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith creates some new biomedical advice with you as his graduate student. You graduate. Dr. Smith wants to hire you for his private company to commercialize this device that he's developed. You're in a postdoc at Seattle University, but Dr. Smith files an H-1b petition for you for his private company. You can hold both H-1bs at the same time. Concurrent non-quota H-1b, that is the one for Seattle University, and the quota H-1b for Dr. Smith. Okay, let's move on here. Let's talk a little bit about Capcap OPT. Promised the international office I would stay away from talking about OPT, but I do have to address Capcap because it's directly related to the H-1b filing process. So back in 2008, the administration was concerned that international students were having problems staying in the United States after getting their H-1B, because the H-1B would start on October 1st, but they would have this gap between the end of their OPT and October 1st, and how to fix that. So Capcap OPT came into being. So what Capcap does is, if a quota subject H-1B petition is filed on your behalf, it's filed prior to the end of your OPT, and it's approved, eventually approved, your OPT and your student status are extended to midnight September 30th. If that H-1B petition is filed during your grace period, and you know you have a 60-day grace period of status after the end of your OPT, if it's filed during your grace period, then you get an extension of your F1 status, but you do not get an extension of your OPT, okay? So filed before H-1B petition, filed before the end of your OPT, you get an extension of your OPT automatically till midnight September 30th. Filed during your grace period, you get no extension of OPT, you get an extension of your status, so you cannot work between the end of your OPT and October 1st, but you can stay in the United States. Okay, so to document your Capgap benefit, you go back to the school from which you graduate, let's say Seattle University, and once they see that an H-1B petition has been filed on your behalf, and they may ask for a receipt for that petition from you, the fee receipt we call it, they will issue an I-20 for you, which shows that you are enjoying a Capgap benefit. Okay. You generally cannot travel during Capgap, unfortunately, internationally, because you will not have an EAD to show that you are authorized to work in the U.S. And there's a strange quirk in the immigration regulations which requires an EAD, an actual physical work card, to re-enter the U.S. If you don't have the physical work card, then you will not be allowed re-entry. So you're probably stuck in the U.S. between the end of your OPT, which might be, say, mid-May, and October 1st. You won't be able to travel during that time. Okay. Let's see. I can't read that one. Oh, can you get an H-1B through your own business? The short answer is no. The long answer is it's complicated. It is theoretically possible to file for yourself for an H-1B through your own business, but immigration hates this. They really hate this. So the bottom line is I strongly discourage people from trying to do it. There are other alternatives, visa alternatives that might be more feasible if you start your own business, depending on your circumstances, but not an H-1B. Okay. Okay. All right. Let me see if I can advance now. Yes, I can. All right. Sorry. So H-1b workarounds, there are a few things that you can do if you're not chosen in the H-1B lottery to stay in the U.S. and continue working. The first one is something we call Day 1 CPT. And this is potentially a minefield, potentially dangerous, but if you're careful with it, it can be very beneficial. So what happens with Day 1 CPT is you enroll in a new course of study, a graduate program generally, and the school where you enroll gives you immediate authorization to start curricular practical training. And this will often or frequently allow you to continue your employment with your employer, okay? The problem with Day 1 CPT is there are many shady or sketchy programs around the U.S. that will, let's say, place you in a 7-Eleven for employment. That's really terrible. There are two really good programs that I know about that I've placed in the materials here, Ottawa University and Harrisburg University. Both are good, solid Day 1 CPT programs that are very carefully structured and carefully monitored by the school. So if Day 1 CPT is a really good remedy for a lot of people, the only downside is that you will have to pay tuition. You will have to be enrolled full-time at all times in a program of study. The way these programs are structured is they're low attendance programs. You go into the school, say 1 weekend a month, something like that for your in-person instruction. But most of the time, you're allowed to stay with the employer and work for the employer. There are two different types of trainee visas, which can be workarounds, the H3 trainee and the J1 trainee. If you're new in your career and training is a realistic possibility for you, one of these might work for you. There is a final workaround, the L1 transferee visa. If your employer has international operations, they can transfer you abroad for 1 year and then transfer you back on an L1 visa. The only downside there is if you come back on an L1 visa, you are locked to that employer. If you're in H1b status, you're pretty free to move to other employers. But if you come back as an L1 with a particular employer, you're absolutely positively locked to that employer. And if they refuse to sponsor you for a green card, then you're out of luck. Okay. Next up is H1b Alternatives. There is an alternative to the H1b for Canadian and Mexican citizens. This is called a TN. This is very, very similar to an H1b, except it's based on a list of occupations elaborated by the 3 countries, not a general concept like, a professional level position. It's a list of occupations. If you're in an MBA program, it's kind of risky because the only occupation on the TN list for MBAs is something called management consultant, and that's a heavily scrutinized, difficult category to get into. Okay, other alternatives. We already briefly mentioned the H1B one for Chile citizens of Chile and Singapore. Very similar to the H1B, except it does not carry dual intent. There's a visa for Australian citizens called an E3. Again, very, very similar to the H1B, given in 2-year increments, but no dual intent. And then finally, there's in the J1 category, J1 exchange visitor category, there are quite a few categories within the J1 that allow for employment in the United States. The most prominent that might interest some of you is K through 12 teacher. They sponsor many, the J1 programs sponsor many K through 12 teachers a year. If you're in the education field, that might be an alternative to the H1B. Okay. More alternatives, the O1 person of extraordinary ability or achievement. Not many of you are going to fit this classification because you're going to be recent graduates from higher ed in the United States. An O1 generally means you've attained a very high level of acclaim internationally. So not many people on this call will fit there. The E1, E2, this, if your country of origin, let's see, I see a few people with suggestive last names. I can't really tell. But if your country of origin, your country of citizenship, I should say, has an investor treaty or a trader treaty with the United States, then you individually could invest as little as $50,000 and start a business that would give you a visa for the rest of your life. If a company of your same nationality, let's say you're Japanese and Sony wants to hire you for employment in the United States, that's a Japanese company. If they have your same nationality, they could sponsor you for an E1 or E2 visa as an essential employee of that company. If you want to see if your country of nationality has an investor or a trader treaty with the United States, you can look at this URL I've got up here at the State Department. It lists all the treaty countries and when the treaty was entered into. And finally, I've got there, in addition to being a workaround, the L1A and L1B as an alternative to the H1B, in addition to being a workaround, if you were employed by an international company, a company with international operations for at least a year before you came to the United States, they may be able to re-employ you in the US. Okay, next slide. What if you don't get a job offer in the US? Well, it's not the end of the world. You might want to go back to school and retool your skills. As I said, if you got into a major that did not lead to a job offer that was like maybe in the social sciences or the liberal arts, You may want to go back to school and get a graduate degree that's more in line with the US job market. You may want to look at Canada, Australia, and other countries. Canada has a program now called Express Entry that will allow you to immigrate to that country very quickly. And I've got an immigration lawyer's information up here, Ryan Neely. Also, it may be possible that you get a job offer with a big international company and they want to take you back home. They value your linguistic skills, they value your cultural skills, and they want you to work back home. And that's never a loser. That can be a real big, important assignment. And eventually you may be transferred back to somewhere in Europe or the US or some other exciting part of the world. Okay, permanent residence. We, as I said before, when I started this presentation, we're not going to be able to. And again, I am frozen. Great. Let me unshare and share again. Well, this is terrible, folks. This is awful. Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay, so we're just going to cover real briefly the basic routes to permanent residence. Permanent residence is a status which allows you to live and work for almost any employer in the U.S. for the rest of your life, for your entire life. Permanent residence is generally given in 10-year increments. You can renew your permanent residence card very easily, like a driver's license. So very good benefit to have, hard to achieve. Our system in the U.S. is not very friendly to grant permanent residence. So let me just walk through real quickly the basic routes to permanent residence. You can be sponsored by an employer for permanent residence. This is the normal route that most of you are going to be following. You can also, in fairly rare instances, you can self-sponsor. A lot of people ask me about self-sponsorship. It's not very common. It's not very easy. So don't immediately think, hey, I'm going to sponsor myself. Not common, not easy. You can be sponsored by close family members who are permanent residents or U.S. citizens. Obviously, the most common route for a lot of you would be being sponsored by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse. And of course, today, spouses can include same-sex spouses. You can also be sponsored by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident parent. You can be sponsored by a U.S. citizen child who's reached the age of 21. And you can be sponsored by a U.S. citizen sibling. Keep in mind that in many of the family preferences, there are long waits to immigrate. So don't think that, hey, my sister who's a U.S. citizen, she lives in New York, she's going to sponsor me. Well, generally that takes about 14 years. So don't get your hopes up. Asylum, if you fear persecution in your home country because of race, religion, national origin, social group, or political opinion, you can apply for asylum, but I would strongly encourage you to seek out a lawyer that knows a lot about asylum before you make that plunge. Because once you go down the asylum route, it's hard to go back. And if you don't have a good asylum case and you drop your student status in favor of your asylum application, that's going to be a problem, a big problem. If you invest a large amount of money in the U.S., that is $500,000 or $1 million, you can get a green card. But there are problems with that program right now. So I would, carefully check into it. There are not many attorneys in the U.S. that do that kind of green card application. That's called an EB-5 application. If you need a referral to an attorney who's an expert in that, please hit me up and I'll be happy to send you over to someone who knows about that. If you're the victim of domestic abuse, that is, you've been abused physically or mentally by a partner or person in the position of a partner or spouse, you may be able to apply for a green card. If you've been the victim of human trafficking or the victim of a serious crime committed in the U.S., you may be able to apply for a green card. If you're sponsored by a congressman, a U.S. congressman or a senator in what we call a private bill, that is a green card application just for you, you may be able to get a green card, but keep in mind that type of sponsorship is very, very rare and reserved for really severe humanitarian situations. Sometimes if the government decides that you don't belong in the U.S., they can put you in what we call removal proceedings, that is, try to deport you. In those removal proceedings, an immigration judge can stop your deportation, but that, again, is very rare. And finally, you can apply for what we call the diversity visa lottery. Please only apply at the site that I've got there, mentioned there, www.travel.state.gov. Don't go through a private entity to apply for the visa lottery. They're going to rip you off. They're going to take money from you, and they may not even file your lottery application. Many people ask me, does the visa lottery application conflict with my student status? No, it does not. Every time we've asked the State Department about it, and we ask about this frequently, they say, no, it's not a consideration on whether or not we grant a visa or not. So don't worry about applying for the visa lottery and then having problems getting your next F1 or some other type of visa abroad. Okay, let me just show you last year, these were the countries of origin that were excluded from the visa lottery. And basically what the visa lottery is intended to do give out 50,000 green cards to folks from low immigration countries. So we knock out folks born in high immigration countries unless their spouse is born elsewhere. So for example, if you're born in China, People's Republic of China, but your spouse was born in Macau, Macau is considered part of Portuguese territory for purposes of the lottery, not for purposes of politics, obviously, but for purposes of the lottery, considered part of Portugal. So you get a really good place in the lottery if your spouse is born in Macau, but you're born in China. Chinese folks born in China don't qualify because it's a high immigration country, but folks born in Macau do. Okay, so that's all. There's a lot more I said in the slide deck regarding permanent residence through employment mostly. And there's my little bio if you want to see my bio. And now I'm going to take your questions, and let's go to the chat and see what questions we have here. Okay. All right. So let me see if I can enlarge this. I don't know how to enlarge it. Okay. And let me see if I can move it. Okay, good. All right. So what is the percentage winning the lottery? This is Chloe has asked this. So Chloe, as I said, you can do the math, 275,000 petitions, and I assume you're talking about the H1b lottery here. Chloe, are you talking about the lottery, the H1b lottery, or the DV lottery, the diversity visa lottery? I assume you're talking about the H1b lottery here, right? Yes, so the percentage of people winning the lottery is for people who don't have a U.S. earned master's degree, maybe about 50% or less. For folks with a U.S. earned master's degree, maybe a little bit better than that, somewhere between 60 and 70%. But it's not good. It's not great percentages. It really depends on how many petitions are filed. The fewer petitions are filed, the greater your chance of winning. The more petitions that are filed, the less your chances of winning. Someone asked here, what is Dun & Bradstreet? Dun & Bradstreet is a corporate rating service that will tell you a lot about companies. You go to their site, just Google Dun & Bradstreet, and you can search for any company's name, and it will tell you when the company's founded, how many employees they have, whether they're profitable, what their pros and cons are. It's a company rating service, basically. So that's a rating service that I suggest you look at when you're trying to figure out if a company is good or bona fide. Is a previous B1, B2 a problem for H1b filing? No, not at all. Not in the least. OPT, this next question is, I have OPT for 1 year. If I start working after graduation in August 2022, does that mean I register for March 2023? Yes, that is correct. Yes. What happens if we have two employers apply for the lottery? Nancy, this is considered fraud by immigration. So think about it rationally. There's no reason for more than one employer. Say you're working for employer A on OPT. Why would employer B, for whom you're not working, file for you in the H1b lottery? It makes no sense. So generally immigration sees, when they see this, they see more than one employer filing for you, they consider that fraud. And I put that in the presentation. So don't do that. Go with the employer that you really want to work for. Don't allow another employer to file for you. Okay, that is generally considered to be fraud. if immigration discovers that that second employer or the first employer had no intention of employing you, they will go after both you and the employer. So really a bad idea to do this. Okay, let's see. The next question is just a question mark. Okay. So if the H-1B application is in March, when should I be filing the paperwork? Okay, so the registration period is in March. You should have all the paperwork to the attorney, hopefully by late February, okay, so that they can put your name in the registration. So late February. Can one apply for the H-1B lottery while also extending STEM OPT? Yes, absolutely, you can do that. And I suggest that for a lot of people. If you need the STEM extension, if you need to go ahead and file for the STEM extension, do that simultaneously with putting your name in the lottery, because as I said, there's no guarantee you're going to be selected in the lottery. So you need to, you need to have a plan B, and that plan B would be your STEM extension. So definitely file for your STEM extension on time, even though you're putting your name in the lottery. Okay, next question is, what is an exchange visitor? Exchange visitor is a particular visa category called J1. And that's the different visa category that some people come in. For example, if someone is sponsored to be a student in the US on a scholarship by their home government, a lot of times they come on a J1 exchange visitor visa. Okay. Does maternity break affect the H-1B lottery or OPT extension? No, generally not. It depends. It just depends. If you're on legitimate maternity leave, then you probably would not be affected for the H-1B lottery or OPT. The only problem is, if you're on maternity leave, the employer may be more reluctant to file for you in the lottery. I don't know. So it could have a lot of different effects, and you need to talk in detail with your employer. But it's generally not a good idea, if you're in the process of going toward permanent residence. It's really not a good idea to have a kid if you can avoid it, because it could interrupt your work visa. It could cause you problems with your status, all those kinds of things. So I would wait. I would put off having children until you get your green card in general. Once the H-1B is approved, do I have to return to my country to get the visa and my passport? Yes, you do. But as I said, your status, if you're maintaining valid status in the U.S., you can generally change your status to H-1B within the U.S., and you don't have to leave. Your status in the U.S. is governed by your H-1B approval notice. It's not governed by the visa stamp in your passport. The visa stamp in your passport is just for international travel. So if you have no intention of traveling internationally, there's no reason to go abroad for a visa stamp. Okay, it's just for international travel. Okay, if a person was previously on an E2, then F1 visa, would they perhaps have problems with getting an H-1B visa? No, not at all. That would have no effect if you were previously on an E2 on getting your H-1B. And am I eligible to register for the H-1B during CPT? Yes, assuming you have completed a degree, at least completed at least one bachelor's degree, and you're on CPT. Yes, you're able to be registered for the H-1B during CPT. Hello, I'm a current PMBA. What's PMBA? Student at Seattle University. Anybody can tell me that?
Professional Master's Business Associate. Okay.
All right. I have held H-1B from 2010 to 2020, 3 extensions. You have H-1, and I've 140 approved. Okay. I worked as an occupational therapist. Now that I've changed fields, I understand I will need a new H-1B and go through the lottery. Will I need a 1-year gap period out of the country? Okay, it depends on whether this person is called guest. Guest, can you speak up? Are you Indian? Hello? Guest, are you Indian?
Hi, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I am Indian.
Okay. Whether or not you can get more H-1B time would depend on whether your priority date is current. What preference category are you in, EB3 or EB2?
EB3. It retrogressed and it's not current right now.
Perfect. Okay, then you can get more H-1B time. You can get a new 3-year H-1B, so no problem at all there. You You won't have to leave the U.S. to get that H-1B. You can do it right here.
That's great. Thank you.
That's great. You're very welcome. Why are there less spots for master students than non-master students? Well, this is deceptive. There are actually more spots for master students. So the master students are considered in two separate lotteries. First, they're considered in the non-masters lottery. They go through that. If they don't get selected in the non-masters lottery, then they're considered in the masters lottery. So actually, all master students and higher are considered for both lotteries, and there are more visas for master students than there are for everybody else. So it's a little bit deceptive. You have to do the math carefully. Is Day 1 CPT, the next question is Day 1 CPT available at Seattle University? Dale?
Oh, I already answered that one. It's in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can skip my answer, which is the next one.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. How can students from Hong Kong be benefited from this as an asylum? Well, if there are students from Hong Kong at Seattle University that have definite fears of returning to Hong Kong, no problem. They can apply for asylum. They're going to have to demonstrate why they fear going home. It can't be just a generalized fear. It has to be something pretty specific. So if you'll hit me up offline, I will be happy to answer that question. If you send me an email, I'll be happy to answer that question in more detail. Okay. Where can we find an attorney? Everywhere. They're everywhere. Hello? Someone's unmuted. Someone's unmuted there. Can you mute yourself? So Cecilia, where can you find an attorney? As I said before, immigration attorneys tend to specialize a lot. They focus on things like asylum, family cases, employment-based cases, those kinds of things. You need to find an attorney that focuses on the area that you're interested in. Our office, for example, handles almost everything except international adoptions, and we don't handle EB-5 investor cases, but everything else we do handle. And we're right there in Seattle, right near Little Saigon, if you know where that is, on the south side of town. So we're happy to handle anything that you might have. But if it's something very, very highly specialized that we don't handle, I would send you to some other attorney. So you can, if you're looking for an attorney, you can shoot me an email. And if we can't handle whatever it is you're looking at, then we can refer you to someone else. I'm graduated in June 2023. When's the right time for my employer to file for my H-1B? Well, unfortunately, they won't be able to file unless you have I don't know who this is. This is Shruti. Shruti, can you speak up? Are you graduating with a graduate degree or an undergrad degree?
It's a graduate degree. It's a STEM degree.
Okay. And your undergrad degree is in what field?
It's in electronics and communication engineering.
Okay. So if you get a job offer that relates to your undergrad degree, your employer could file next March. If you get a job offer that does not relate to your undergraduate degree, you don't have a job offer yet, then your employer would have to wait until March 2024 to file for you, to register your name. Okay, does that make sense?
If I'm on CPT and if the employer is willing to sponsor for H1B, then
they could file for you in March of 2023, or they could file for you if you're on CPT now and you're working for an employer and they want to sponsor you now. Is that right?
yes, I just want to ask if they wish to sponsor me now, then
It could. Yeah, it could. Absolutely. Because you already have an undergrad degree, assuming that your undergrad degree is directly related to the to your job offer, they could sponsor you now. The only problem with sponsoring you now is you're not going to go into the master's quota. You're going to go into the non-master's quota, which gives you a much lower chance of success. But if the employer really wants to sponsor you now, it's not very expensive. It's pretty inexpensive just to put your name in the registration and see what happens. And because of the low chance of getting chosen, it's best to do that as many times as possible. So my encouragement to the employer would be go ahead and put your name in the registration and see what happens. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So Swati asked, does the company have to be e-verified to get the H-1B for STEM extension? So that's a rather confusing question. So a company has to be enrolled in e-verify to sponsor you or for you to get a STEM extension. with that company. But they do not have to be enrolled in E-Verify to file for your H-1B registration. Okay, so the two are really not related. So to get the STEM extension, you have to be working for a company that's enrolled in E-Verify. But to get into the H-1B registration, the company does not have to be enrolled in E-Verify. So two separate things. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Winston, let's see. If a college and university wants to offer me a job, does it mean that I can fall into one of the exemptions? So I don't need to go through the lottery. That is correct. If you're offered a job by a college or university in the United States, you do not go through the H-1B lottery. You go through the quota. You're a quota exempt. Shruti asks, I think I already answered this, Shruti. Can the H-1B be filed while I'm on CPT? Yes, it can. Alice asks, do master's students need to be studying a topic related to the H-1B, even though their bachelor's is related to their job? Well, not necessarily. As I said, the H-1B can be related to any degree program that you've completed, including a prior degree program. But to get into the master's quota, you need to have completed a U.S. master's degree. But the master's does not have to be required for your job. Okay, so it's a little bit confusing. So to get into the master's quota, let's say you complete an MBA, but the MBA is not required for your job. Not a problem. You still get into the master's quota just because you've achieved a U.S. master's degree. Doesn't have to be required for your job. Okay. How can I know which jobs would be related to my degree? Let's see, how can I know which jobs would be related to my degree and be eligible to apply for OPT with H-1B? Okay, so you just ask the employer, what does this job require? Does it require my degree? And they will tell you. If you can't figure it out, then you need to go to an immigration lawyer and ask them if your job requires your degree program. But generally, it's going to be pretty clear. You know, you have an accounting degree, your job is an accountant. It requires an accounting degree. Let's see. Could a private dental clinic be able to sponsor an H-1B? Yes. We do H-1Bs for dentists all the time. Now, if you're not a dentist, it's probably going to be hard for a private dental clinic to sponsor you for an H-1B because a private dental clinic, unless they're very large, would not probably need someone, a degreed professional that's not a dentist. Okay, let me go back here. If I want to switch jobs during my OPT or OPT extension, can I only do that between November to February? Yes, generally, because you want the employer to you can only do that after you enter into, I'm not sure what the nature of this question is. This is Altanai. Can you speak up, Altanai, and explain to me what you mean by this?
Yeah, sure. Hello, David. So I just heard you saying that it's not a good idea to switch when the lottery is in progress. So I wanted to understand if I've understood correctly that I am only ought to do this after the lottery results come.
Well, you want to go into the lottery every year. So you're with an employer that registers you for the lottery in March. You don't want to change employers until you get into H-1B status if you're selecting the H-1B lottery, okay? So you don't want to be jumping around between employers when you're asking the employer to register you in the lottery. That would make no sense. So does that answer your question?
So that would mean that the job I end up with after my after completing my graduate course is the one I have to stick with through the 3-year period.
Well, not necessarily. You could switch if you don't get selected. Say you're on STEM OPT and you don't get selected during your first year for the lottery, and you want to switch jobs during your OPT. That's not a problem. But you have to switch jobs. It would be best to switch jobs before the lottery registration, the H-1B registration period starts, obviously. And you want to get into that new job with sufficient time to give your employer enough experience with you so that they know whether they want to sponsor you for the H-1B. Because, you know, a lot of employers are not going to sponsor you if you've just been working for them for 1 week and they don't know whether you're a good employee or not. So the bottom line is, you know, I think you want to get with one employer, and if you like that employer and you like your employment with that employer, it's not going to increase your chances to win the lottery by switching to a different employer. So if you don't like that employer, move to a different employer. If you do like that employer, stick with them. But don't move right around lottery time, because that's going to mess you up. You won't be able to apply for the lottery if that's the case. Okay. Next question from Tron. I'm on STEM OPT and my US visa is currently expired. My H-1B gets approved. Would I have difficulties traveling back home for vacation or renewing my visa? Probably not. Tron, it looks like you're probably from Vietnam. Is that right? Is that right, Tron?
Oh, yes.
Your name is Vietnamese. Yeah. So yeah, you won't have any problem. You're on STEM OPT, you get approved for H-1B status. It's after October 1st. You're in H-1B. You go back home for an H-1B visa, probably no problem at all. Yeah. Yeah, so no problem. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
You're very welcome. What would you say is the average price for applying for H-1B and green card? Probably for H-1B around $6,000, including the filing fees. For green card, around $12,000, including your filing fees. Okay. If you've been granted an H-1B visa by an employer, but after a few months you're unhappy with the company and you want to quit, does it mean I'll have to go back to my nationality? Sammy, if you absolutely want to quit employment in the U.S., then you'd have to go home, or you'd have to change to some other visa category like F1, go back to F1. If you just want to change employers, not a problem. As I said, once you're in H-1B status after October 1st, you can easily change employers through what we call portability. The new employer files an H-1B petition for you. You move over to that employer, and boom, you're done with the old employer. Okay, so that's your alternatives there. Can I email you at david-ware.com? Yes, you can. So just email me at dware@david-ware.com. And if it's a difficult question, Preeti, I may ask you to set up a consultation. If it's an easy one, I'll answer it right on the email. And can CPT be converted to OPT? Yes, well, not really converted. There is no conversion of CPT to OPT. But once you finish your degree program, you can apply for OPT up to, as you know, up to 90 days in advance of finishing your degree program. Or is it 120 now, Dale? I forget. I think it's 90, still 90, isn't it?
The unemployment period, you mean?
Yeah,
90 days.
No, applying in advance of finishing your degree. Is it 90
Oh, 90 days before program end date.
Yeah, 90 days you can apply for your OPT, and your CPT is not really converted to OPT. You just move from CPT to OPT once you finish your degree program.
Yeah, I think the quick answer for her is just they're totally different process.
Yeah, totally different process, and there's no real conversion.
Right.
But it is possible to move smoothly from CPT to OPT at the end of your degree program. It is possible, not always. Okay. I'm currently on OPT with a full-time job, eligible for STEM OPT, but my F1 has expired. Is it risky to go home to renew my F1? Yes, it is. Okay. The reason being is that the consul is going to look you in the face and say, hey, you've got this great job in the US. Why would you come back to your home country? I never advise people on OPT to go home for visa renewal if they can avoid it, because the F1 visa is a single intent visa. It means you have to maintain a residence abroad at all times that you have no intention of abandoning. If you're working for Google or Microsoft in a great job in, near the Seattle area, consul is going to look at you and say, why would you come home? You're working for Google. I'm not going to give you a new visa. So that's always a big risk if you go home with OPT. So I would not advise it. I think that's my last question. And I want to apologize to everybody for all the AV difficulties I've had today. I have no idea what's going on. It's very strange. I've never had these difficulties before. And I want to apologize for that. Looks like we got two more questions. Here's another question, the final question. This is the last one I'm going to take. Something about, okay, let's see. My employer is sponsoring for my H-1B. How does the H-4 visa work? So generally, H-4s are not allowed to work. The only time they're allowed to work is in two instances. One, if you have filed the second step, and Vivek, it looks like you're Indian, is that right? Hello, Vivek? Are you Indian? Hello, Vivek. There you are. Vivek, unmute yourself. Are you Indian? Hello, Vivek, speak up. Vivek, I see you unmuted yourself. Can you tell me if you're Indian or not? Okay, so 2 instances in which the H4 spouse is allowed to work. One, if you are Indian and you've completed the second step of the green card process, that is, you have an approved employer petition, your spouse can apply for a work card. Also, if you're in the last stage of applying for the green card, that is, you file for adjustment of status, your spouse can file for a work card based on the adjustment of status application. Okay, I hope that answers your question. That is the very last question I'm going to answer, folks. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you.